Every Final Fantasy hero on this list was handed a life they never asked for, a weapon, a puppet, a dream given a body. None of them got to choose who they'd become, and that stolen choice is the only thing that actually decides where they land here. Only one of them ever manages to take that identity back and make it his own. Warrior of Light. The character who started the entire Final Fantasy franchise is barely a character at all. That is not an insult. It is the whole point. In 1987, on a Famicom cartridge nobody expected to spawn 30-something years of storytelling, the hero of the first Final Fantasy walked on screen with no name that mattered, no backstory, and no dialogue worth quoting. You picked a class. You picked a portrait. The game called him the Warrior of Light and left the rest completely empty. That emptiness was the design. The 4 Heroes of Light exist as vessels, defined by job class and player projection instead of scripted personality, because the genre hadn't figured out how to do anything else yet. No wound, no forced identity, just a blank the player fills in themselves. That blankness is why he ranks low on writing and impossibly high on importance. Every crossover, every remaster, every reference has to build his personality retroactively because the original text refused to. But if the first hero was a blank slate the player had to fill in, the next one arrives with the opposite problem. A self so fully formed, it's built entirely out of guilt he can't put down. Cecil Harvey, the scariest enemy in Final Fantasy IV, is not a boss. It is Cecil's own reflection. He starts as a Dark Knight, one of Baron's finest, gutting villages and stealing crystals for a king who turns out rotten to the core. Nobody tricks him into it. He does it, believes in it, then lives with it. That is heavier than a hero who stumbles out of a crystal chamber with no memory. The easy version of this story is a costume change. Dark armor for white, black magic for holy light, evil guy becomes good guy. Cecil's real transformation strips that away. He climbs Mount Ordeals and lets go of the power that made him dangerous, because that power was never neutral. It was built on obedience to a corrupt system, and the game refuses to let him keep it while calling himself a paladin. That is the actual trade, not gaining strength, losing it on purpose, as penance. He becomes one of the clearest templates the series ever built, the good man crawling out from under what he used to be, and honest fans still argue he plays it too straight. Atonement makes for a heavy hero. So the story's next move is almost mischievous, handing the spotlight to someone who never bled for a single sin, daring you to decide if that makes him less of a hero or the smartest one yet. Bartz Klauser. Bartz Klauser might be the least traumatized main character in the entire series, and that is exactly why people can't stop arguing about him. No dead kingdom, no stolen memories, no forced destiny carved into his back before he could walk. Just a guy on a chocobo, wandering because staying in one place sounded boring. After a night gets psychologically dismantled by guilt he never chose, Bartz feels like someone opened a window in a room sealed shut, since 1991. That contrast is the whole point. Final Fantasy V dropped in 1992 with a lead who wanted nothing more complicated than adventure, friendship, and a good excuse to punch a meteor. Bartz holds the party together while the real spectacle happens around him. The job system lets any character become a knight, a ninja, a dancer, a literal mime, and Bartz is the guy cheerfully encouraging everyone to keep experimenting. His personality is thin, his function is not. That is where the split happens. Some fans call him the most charming lead in the franchise precisely because he never demands the spotlight. Others call him a placeholder, propped up by a game busy being brilliant elsewhere. Nothing in his script insists he deserves the top of this list. If a hero this unburdened can still be beloved, the whole idea that suffering earns a ranking just took its first real hit. Charm can carry a hero a long way, but the series' most famous face went the exact opposite direction, building his entire cool exterior out of a lie he was telling himself. Cloud Strife. Cloud Strife is the coolest hero in the franchise, and that coolness is a symptom, not a strength. The spiky hair, the giant sword, the too cool for this mercenary attitude, all of it reads like confidence. It is actually a costume. Cloud built his personality out of borrowed memories and stolen bravado because the real version of himself was too broken to look at directly. Final Fantasy VII, released in 1997, sells Cloud as a detached gun for hire with zero interest in anyone's problems but his own. That performance holds for hours. Then the story starts pulling threads, and everyone unravels the same way. The tough guy act was never a personality, it was a survival mechanism built on a fractured mind. His memories do not add up. His timeline does not add up. The story he tells the party collapses under contradicting specifics, and the truth underneath is worse than a simple lie. Cloud assembled his identity out of pieces that were not his to take, and did it so completely he believed the performance himself. That is a heavier wound than looking broken from the start. A boy handed a self he never earned, wore it so well the industry mistook the mask for the man. Nothing in the text says every fan agrees what that makes him, but follow the pattern. The same trait that made him iconic is the trait fans now argue is overexposed, and both sides are arguing about the same fracture. A hero who lies to himself to survive is one thing, but the next lead flips it inside out. He's the most open, charming person in the room, and that warmth hides a question far more unsettling than any lie. What if you were never really born at all? Zidane Tribal. The most charming man in Gaia is not entirely sure he is a man at all. That's the trick nobody clocks on first playthrough. Zidane Tribal walks into Final Fantasy IX, grinning, flirting, cracking jokes mid-heist, the exact opposite of the broken soldier one rung down this list. He steals hearts for a living, literally, as part of a theatrical band of thieves who treat grand theft like performance art. Compare that to the last hero on this countdown, a man who built a fake identity just to survive his own memory. Zidane doesn't fake anything. He's genuinely warm, genuinely funny, genuinely the guy you'd want next to you in a fight. That's exactly what makes the back half of his story so brutal. Underneath the charm is a boy grown in a lab, engineered as a living weapon meant to end the world he now loves. He didn't inherit a lie the way Cloud did. He has to face the possibility that everything warm about him, every joke, every soft moment with Dagger, might just be biology doing its job. The tale isn't the weird part. The purpose, stitched into his cells, is nothing in the script hands him a clean resolution to that horror, but the pattern is impossible to miss. Every scene built to make you love him doubles as evidence against the idea that he was ever supposed to exist for himself. That's the theory fans keep circling back to, that Zidane ranks so high precisely because his wound hides in plain sight, dressed up as personality instead of pain. But at least these heroes belonged to their own worlds, however uneasily. The next one is dropped into a world he has no place in whatsoever, and has to learn to live somewhere that may not want to keep him alive. Tidus. Tidus never had to save Spira. He had to earn the right to keep existing in it. That sounds dramatic until you realize it's literal. He's a dream, a memory of a dead city called Zanarkand, projected into a world 1,000 years removed from anything he understands. The deeper the story goes, the clearer it gets that his own existence has an expiration date built in. Most heroes fight to protect a world. Tidus fights just to stay in one that technically has no room for him. He shows up loud. Star athlete energy, blitzball trophies, a laugh that doesn't fit the mood of anyone around him, and Spira is a place built on funeral customs and religious grief management. He cries on screen. He panics out loud. He argues with summoners and monks and gods like a guy who never got the memo that you're supposed to be stoic about the apocalypse. Compare that to the wall of quiet dignity guys who came before him, and some players bounced off him hard early on. Strip away the laugh, and what's underneath is a kid watching his own reality get rewritten in real time. The same identity horror that's been building since the last entry, except now it's not, was I made in a lab, it's, was I ever real at all? His relationship with Yuna becomes the only stable thing in a world actively erasing him. That's the trade the arc runs on. The more human he acts, the more the story insists he isn't one. Being unwanted by a world is one kind of nightmare. The next hero never got a choice about the world at all. She was built for a role before she ever got the chance to want one. Lightning Farron. Somebody put an actual timestamp on this woman's soul. Not a metaphor, an actual mark branded into her body by beings who decided her life was already finished before she got a say in it. That's the starting position for Lightning Farron. Most heroes fight a villain. She fought a verdict. Final Fantasy XIII introduced her in 2009 as a former soldier, cold, efficient, allergic to sentiment, the kind of woman who treats compassion like a tactical liability. That exterior was armor, built because the story handed her a countdown clock and expected her to turn into a monster on schedule. Her arc runs through resisting that fate and letting people back in without dropping her guard. Here's what makes her genuinely strange among this lineup. She didn't get one game to prove her point, she got 3, plus spin-offs, plus a re-release campaign that made her the most marketed protagonist the franchise ever built. The woman who refused to be told what she was became the face the company told everyone to expect. That contradiction split the fanbase permanently. Some see competence and iconography, others see a lead who never got as emotionally legible as the people around her. Fighting. A fate written for you is one thing when you hate the people who wrote it. It gets crueler when the ones who wrote it loved you, and the sentence is the one thing your father died to hand you. Noctis Lucis Caelum. 4 friends pile into a car for a road trip, and one of them is already dead. That is not a metaphor. That is the plot. Noctis Lucis Caelum, the reluctant prince of Final Fantasy XV, released in 2016, opens on the most relaxed premise the series has ever tried. Boys, a car, an open road, bad jokes about fishing and instant noodles. It plays like a buddy comedy. It is actually a funeral procession that has not told the guest of honor yet. That is the cruelty of the shape. Every mile Noctis drives with Gladiolus, Ignis, and Prompto is a mile closer to a throne room where his death was scheduled before he learned to walk. His father does not hand him a kingdom. He hands him a sentence, wrapped in duty, delivered by the one man Noctis would never raise a fist against. The friendship is real. The camping trips, the photographs, none of that is fake warmth, just warmth spent inside a countdown, which is somehow worse. Fans still argue Noctis gets lost in his own ensemble, the quiet center of a louder circle. Maybe that is the point. A man walking toward a scripted death does not need the spotlight, just company on the way there. Accepting a death written for you is the most passive form of heroism there is. So what happens when a hero refuses the script entirely, and answers the people who wrote his suffering with 20 years of pure, patient rage? Clive Rosfield. He starts this story wanting exactly one thing. One man dead. By the end, he wants an entire system torn down to the foundation, and that escalation tells you revenge was never going to be big enough for what happened to him. Clive Rosfield is the protagonist of Final Fantasy XVI, released in 2023, and the first lead in this ranking who is unambiguously an adult. Not adult-coded, not aged up for marketing, actually grown, actually scarred, done pretending the world owes him softness. The series treats that shift like a genre change. His world runs on dominance and icons, people bonded to god-sized monsters, then weaponized and discarded by empires that see them as tools first and humans never. Clive lives inside that machine personally before he ever tries to dismantle it publicly. That separates him from the last few names on this list. He is not enduring a fate someone else wrote. He is hunting the people, holding the pen. That makes him arguably the most emotionally competent hero the franchise has produced, and competence here is a life sentence. The more clearly he sees the system, the more of the world's suffering becomes his job to fix. Early reception leans heavily toward praising the writing and the performance. Nothing confirmed makes this next part official, but the pattern is hard to miss. His sincerity is also why some fans rank him below louder, stranger protagonists. Grounded reads as less iconic next to a man who screams about materia. Rage is a way to hold on to yourself when the world takes everything. But the series had already asked a harder question decades earlier, through someone who wasn't taken from, she was manufactured with no self to hold on to in the first place. Tara Branford. Somebody else picked her name. That is not a metaphor. She did not choose it, did not choose her face, did not choose the war she was built to fight in. Tara Branford enters Final Fantasy VI in 1994 under mind control, a weapon with a pulse, and the horror is not that she loses herself somewhere along the way. She never had a self to lose. Half human, half Esper, she was raised as a tool before she was allowed to be a person. Every other broken hero on this list at least got an original copy stolen from them, someone to blame, some version of themselves worth grieving. Tara does not get that. There is no true self buried underneath the programming, waiting to be freed. There is only a woman built to serve, then handed a blank space where an identity should be, and told to fill it in herself. That is a quieter kind of devastating. No explosions, no throne, no legacy to reclaim. Just a girl working out what a feeling is supposed to be, whether love is real if you were never taught it, whether you can belong to a world that only ever used you. She never gets to stand up as who she was. She has to stand up as someone she is still inventing. Being built as a weapon at least gives you an enemy to blame. But the same world produced someone who chose the uniform, who was loyal by decision, and then watched the sky break open and take away every reason she had left. Balthier. He is the only leading man in the series who introduces himself as the leading man, out loud in the actual dialogue, and then spends the whole game proving it. That is not confidence. That is a magic trick. He says the line, "This story, that is, my story, is not yet done." like he already read the script and decided he liked his part enough to claim it. Final Fantasy XII, released in 2006, does not build itself around him. The credited lead is a street kid named Vaughn, the story is an ensemble, and the political plot belongs to a princess and a disgraced judge. Fans do not care. Ask anyone who has finished the game who the real main character is, and you get one name, and it is not the one on the box. Balthier is a sky pirate with a tailored coat, a smart mouth, and zero interest in whatever destiny anyone tries to hand him. He is also hiding an entire identity underneath the persona, a name and a history he walked away from on purpose. That is the trick nobody else in this ranking pulled off. He was not shaped into a self by trauma he never chose. He built one on purpose, out of style and one-liners, and it worked so well the game still will not officially call him the hero for it. Reinventing yourself is easy when the world is still standing to reinvent yourself in. The next hero didn't get that. She had to find a reason to keep going after the world itself ended, alone, with nothing left to be loyal to. Silas Chair. There is no boss fight for the moment that defines Silas Chair. No sword, no enemy, no timer, just a woman standing on a cliff on an island that used to be a world, deciding whether existing is worth the effort. That is what makes her different from almost everyone ranked so far. The others got turned into weapons against their will. Celes signed up. She was an Imperial general, raised inside the machine, and genuinely good at running it, which means her guilt is not the guilt of a victim. It is the guilt of someone who chose a side, believed in it, and woke up only once the bodies were already counted. She defects, fights her former empire, and then the world actually ends, collapsed into fragments by the very war she helped wage. She washes up alone with nothing left to prove herself to. That is the whole test. No audience, no empire, no reason handed to her. Just whether a person who once called herself a soldier can decide to call herself something else when nobody is watching and nothing is asking her to. She answers it, and Final Fantasy VI is stronger for splitting its spotlight enough to let her carry that answer. Whether she or the ensemble around her owns the title of lead is genuinely debatable, and that debate exists because the game built her large enough to argue about. Choosing to keep going when you're the last one standing is one kind of strength, but the series also gave us someone who does the opposite, who refuses to stand alone at all, and whose entire power is her insistence on dragging a cold man back into the world of the living. Rinoa Hartley. Rinoa Hartley is the reason people forget Final Fantasy VIII even has a lead character to argue about. Squall gets the box art and the gunblade, but the story hands its entire emotional weight to the woman standing next to him. The obvious version of Final Fantasy VIII is a war story about CD mercenaries and a sorceress from the future. The actual engine of the game is a girl teaching a boy how to want things again after he decided wanting things was a liability. Squall built a wall so nobody could hurt him. Rinoa is the reason that wall comes down, brick by reluctant brick. She does not fix her own identity here, she fixes his. Every other hero on this list wrestles their own imposed role, but Rinoa's real work is dismantling someone else's. Her rebellion, her hope, her refusal to let Squall disappear into himself, that becomes the thematic spine of the entire game. Celes had to learn to stand alone with the world in ruins. Rinoa proves the cruel twist underneath that lesson. Nobody actually stands back up by themselves. Somebody insists on it for them. She earns the title's work and gets none of the title. But if that insistence is the only thing that gets a broken person back on their feet, what happens to the one hero this series builds an entire world around and gives no one to insist on anything for him? Van. Every other lead on this list got shattered before they stood back up. Vayne just never gets broken in the first place, and that mercy is the most damning thing about him. He is the commoner entry point into Final Fantasy XII, a street kid from Rabanastre wandering the edges of a war between empires. Someone has to be small enough for the player to stand next to, while emperors and judges argue over a continent. But being the door into the story is not the same as being the story, and Vaan spends most of his own game proving it. The real weight goes to everyone around him. Basch carries a stolen identity and a decade of disgrace. Ashe carries a dead kingdom and a weapon that could burn the world to get it back. Balthier gets a whole air pirate mythology built for him. Vaan gets a sky he wants to fly in someday, and not much else pressing down on him. That is the actual argument. A cast built almost entirely around political betrayal and generational guilt left its main build lead with nothing to bleed for. Some call that lazy writing, others call it the point, a human-scale window so the audience has somewhere ordinary to stand inside something enormous. Both readings are still fighting, and neither has won. Being ordinary in a huge story is one problem, but there's a stranger one waiting. What happens when the name people insist on ranking isn't a character in the world at all and never was? Ben Starr. Ben Starr has never worn a crown, wielded a legendary sword, or saved a single fictional kingdom, and he still keeps sneaking onto lists like this one. That is because Ben Starr is not a character. He is the man in the recording booth who became Clive Rosfield, and somewhere along the way fans started ranking the performance instead of the person. This is a mismatch, plain and simple. A ranking of protagonists just accidentally graded an actor, but it is worth sitting in that mismatch for a second, because it is not a mistake, it is a symptom. Clive already earned his spot on this list for what the script did to him. The brand, the decade of servitude, the brother he lost twice. What Ben Starr adds is not lore. It is the tremor in Clive's voice when he says something he does not fully believe yet. It is the exhaustion under the anger. Interviews and cast breakdowns credit him with exactly that. An interiority the page only gestures at, and the performance fills in. That is new. Sprite-era leads never got a face or a voice to carry weight the text did not spell out. Modern heroes do, and it means part of what looks like great writing is actually great acting standing in for it, which raises an uglier question. If a voice can hand a hero a soul the script never wrote, what happens to the ones who never got a script at all, and still ended up beloved anyway? Gilgamesh. Nobody has ever ranked him last. Nobody has ever ranked him at all, because the moment you try, you realize he was never playing the same game as everyone else on this list. He shows up in nearly every mainline entry, sword collection rattling, ego enormous, allegiance whichever way the wind and the plot are blowing that day. He has fought heroes, fought alongside them, sold them fake Excalibur knockoffs, and vanished into the multiverse without carrying a story on his back. He is comic relief with a blade fetish, and fans adore him for exactly that. Here's the problem he creates. Every hero on this list got carved open by an identity they never chose, a wound that made them worth watching. Gilgamesh chose himself, repeatedly, badly, hilariously, and never paid for it. No trauma, no stolen name, no dead city dreaming him into existence, just a guy who wandered into game after game and became one of the most beloved faces in the franchise through sheer undiluted charisma. That is dangerous, because it suggests likability alone might be enough to win the room. Except it was never enough to win a rank. He is a supporting act stapled to other people's arcs, a mascot for chaos rather than a vessel for meaning, and the moment you ask what he actually earned, the answer is silence dressed up as a punchline. Being loved and being ranked were never the same thing. There's a reason no one calls him a hero, and the answer is waiting in the one story that dares to hand its lead the end of her own road and ask what she does with it. Lightning Returns. The name at 17 isn't a person, it's a game title, and that mismatch is the entire point, because this is the one entry in the whole lineup where the hero gets to put her own name on the marquee. Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy themed, came out in 2013, closing a trilogy that spent years handing Lightning a fate she never signed up for. A knight built to serve, a soldier assigned a purpose by decree, a woman told exactly who she was allowed to be. The game runs on a hard countdown clock, dresses her in dozens of swappable outfits tied to combat jobs, and spends its entire runtime doing one specific job of its own, closing her story instead of opening someone else's. That's the detail worth sitting with. Every other entry on this list got handed an identity by someone else, a script, a lie, a manufactured self, a role written before they ever had a say. Lightning spent 3 full games resisting exactly that, and the trilogy's answer to her resistance wasn't a new protagonist. It was giving her the title screen. 0 other entries get this treatment. Nobody else on the list gets to be the name of the box. The ranking was never really measuring suffering, it was measuring who took the pen back, and there's still one name left that has to answer for what happens when someone takes that pen and rewrites the entire idea of what a hero even is. Lightning Returns. The number 1 spot on this list does not belong to a person, it belongs to a title, and that is exactly the point. Lightning Farron spent 2 games being handed a job. Soldier, sister, savior, weapon, take your pick. Somebody else always wrote the assignment. Then in 2013, the trilogy closes with a game that puts her name directly into the clock, 13 days on the timer, an entire world's survival stapled to her schedule, and for the first time, the story stops asking her to save someone else's plan and starts asking her to build one of her own. Look back at the whole ladder now. The blank slate wanted a face. The atoning knight wanted forgiveness he never asked to need. The liar wanted a self-worth admitting to. The manufactured girl wanted a body that wasn't a countdown. Every single one of them was being graded on the same hidden test, and it was never how much they bled. It was whether they ever picked up the pen. Lightning does. She spends her final game literally changing costumes, literally rewriting her own role, until the ending stops being about surviving the world and starts being about choosing to belong to the next one. The story finally gave her its own name. She's the one who earned it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.